Greetings everyone, Samthony Grantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for this month's Why You Know review, where I'm going to be talking about, briefly, a series of albums that I wanted to review this past month, people wanted me to review this past month, but I just didn't get a chance to get around to it. Let's do it. This is the fourth LP from this particular indie rock, indie pop band, and again, I'm just finding it as inoffensive and as uninteresting as their last full-length LP. I do like some of the more post-punky songs from their debut record, but between the very uppity drum beats and the bland guitar tones and the very boyish vocals, just perfectly linked in harmony, and just all of these very unmemorable songs. There's nothing about this band, there's nothing about this record that I want to return to. And to be completely honest, there's nothing that even broadcasts to me on their past two records that says, hey, Anthony, you should check out this band's next album because maybe they're on the cusp of something here, but that's just not there for me. But you never know. I did love the past Cage the Elephant record. This is the latest full-length LP from this singer. This is the latest full-length LP from this particular singer-songwriter, July, and it's out now on Sacred Bones Records, and it's easily the most gripping album she has come out with since her 2011 self-titled record. I know she's had a couple of releases since then. However, I'm still not finding this album that exciting. Everything from the vocals to the way that she writes melodies to the tone of the instrumentation and the way this record is recorded just feels way too faint to make any kind of major impact to me. Even though there are some songs that are a bit bolder toward the middle of this album, much of the time when I'm listening to this record, I sort of feel like, is something else going to happen? Is something else going to come in on top of this? Like maybe a vocal that I can sort of make out the words with, or is just a little bit stronger in its conviction or emotional delivery? The new Thou record is just one song after another of massive sludge doom epics, which are actually a little bit more melodic than what I'm used to hearing from this band because they throw some really nice guitar leads on top of some of these songs. However, this record is also easily one of Thou's most demanding so far, standing at 1 hour and 15 minutes with some incredibly long tracks on this thing, a lot of which I don't find to be all that diverse or gratifying when it comes to the long haul. I do think that the band sounds heavy as hell. Everything about their tone, their performances is just ferocious. But I personally am finding the entire record to just be a little bit too uniform in sound to be enjoyable throughout. The new Alden record here, ex-Unicorns member, though I have heard that they may reunite, and frontman for the band Clues, comes through with a shocking disappointment of a solo record right here. Shocking. Songs that are uninteresting, lyrically, melodically, really redundant as well, like literally repeating things over and over that really don't need to be repeated or should in fact be built upon. Pretty bare bones production-wise, and sometimes the recording of these songs isn't even that passable. Alden's vocals still sound really good and seductive. I mean, he's still got that passionate falsetto that won me over on his previous releases. And he is able to come together with a strong mood on a lot of these tracks, especially on the opener, which instrumentally is incredibly eerie before I realized that the song itself is actually incredibly boring. I just don't see how he could have released this and not fleshed out these songs a lot more, considering how great the Clues record that he worked on was. This just feels so unfinished, so improper. I am actually slightly sorry I didn't get to this record. I actually think Phantogram came through with an album that is better than their debut album. I think the band's lead singer, Sarah Barthel, is actually growing as a vocalist. I think her singing on this record is much better than on the band's last record. And the instrumentals on this thing are great. I think they are top-notch, or pretty top-notch, for what right now qualifies as modern indie-tronic synthesizer pop. The beats here are very colorful, they're very groove heavy. I'm not going to say that Phantogram's sound is the most bold or unique on the block, it's very far from that, but if you're crazy over acts like Churches, for example, I think this record could really please you in the heart area. This new CEO record right here essentially brings a bit more indie-tronic magic to the table, with some very significant Yay-Sayer and Animal Collective biting. Some of the beats on this LP, some of the grooves take a bit of an international approach. But overall, I just found a lot of these songs to just be way too dense and colorful and fruity for a collection of tunes that are incredibly basic and uninteresting. I think a lot of these songs are produced very well, but once the vocal melody, once the lead melody of these songs comes into play, that's where this record really falters and exposes itself as being just kind of fluffy. Some of the softer songs on this album I do think do have a strong element of beauty to them, but to me overall this record is just regular, very simple pop music parading as something a little more complex or eccentric. More dark, spacious, moody, and semi-ambient jazz music from these guys on this latest full-length LP, Piano Nights. And I could definitely see why people go nuts for this band. They definitely do have a certain style, a certain sound in jazz music cornered, sort of in the same way a very slowly stalking serial killer corners his victim. And I appreciate the vibraphone, the saxophone, the drums, the piano, just the slow pace of all the instrumentation, all the space, all the vastness, just the pure appreciation for mood and texture on this record. However, I don't see this album sticking out that significantly in this band's discography, and nor were there many parts compositionally that stuck with me or interested me. Really, it was just the overall vibe of these tracks that I ended up liking and gravitating toward. But still, I think this approach to jazz music may entertain some a lot more than it did me, and I see no reason why this record couldn't possibly be entertaining to a newcomer to this band. So if how I described what goes on this record sounds interesting, try it out. Finally, Crosses comes through with a debut full-length LP. If you're not familiar with this outfit, Chino Moreno of Deftones is on this thing singing. Sean Lopez and Scott Chuck also take part in the writing and production of this music as well. And Crosses essentially made a splash in 2011 and 2012, not only because of the people attached to the project, but also because the cover art had a lot of people thinking that this was some kind of weird witch house band no one had heard of yet. Oh yeah, witch house. That was a thing. And overall, while I'm not really moved or amazed by this LP, I think Chino and company came together with a nicely honed sound on this LP that pushes past the EPs that dropped earlier. I mean, you've got the really great vocal melodies and the vocal harmonies that come through on the Team Sleep music, on late-era Deftone records, but there's also an element of industrial and electronically tinged rock music as well that I think huge fans of Nine Inch Nails would appreciate. The new Prince PO&OHNO collaboration, a bit of grimy, politically charged, conscious, hardcore hip-hop on this thing. OHNO pulls together some pretty solid instrumentals on this thing, a few of which are a little eccentric and experimental. Prince Po sounding pretty good for a guy who's been in the industry as long as he's been. Overall, I think the record is a little one-dimensional in its tone, but if you're looking for a hard-hitting hip-hop record that has a strong opinion on the way the world is functioning today, do give this thing a listen. And finally, the new Cynic record over here. I think the band's trajectory over the years has been really interesting, seeing them go from this death metal outfit with elements of alternative rock and progressive rock to a band that just wholly stuck to a lot of these progressive rock elements, and on one of their last EPs that I reviewed sort of sounded a bit like Mars Volta, but I do mean that in a complimentary way because I think a lot of the songs on that EP are fantastic. But with this new album of theirs, I think they falter for a few different reasons. In one department, the recording, the vocals on this LP do not sound flattering, they sound weirdly mixed, and so do the guitars, which are incredibly limp and just really weak throughout the entire album. The bass and the drums stand so prominently throughout the entire LP, which I don't really mind because the bass and the drums are really my favorite parts of this record. They are played fantastically, and a lot of the time the bass locks in with the drums syncopating against these really complex fills and rhythms, and it's actually really fantastic to hear on many of these tracks. And here Cynic pens songs that melodically and structurally are so accessible in some ways, but still have this really strong element of complexity to the playing and the performance. Still, with that being said, I think another thing that sort of lets me down with this Cynic record is that this album to me feels completely drained of those metal elements and even those edgier rock elements that they showed off on one of their previous EPs. The band really sort of goes for more of a, I don't want to say poppier, but just a more sweet on the ears, easygoing alternative rock style, which is fused with these progressive rock sounds and complex performances. And even though this album is by no means terrible, because of these changes, especially in the production department, it is pretty underwhelming. What did you think of any of these albums? Let me know down there in the comments. If you feel the need to share your emotions and ideas and feelings. Transition, I hope you have a nice day. I hope this coming month is better for you than the last month was. And I wish you were here. I'd give you a hug. I would. Anthony Fantano, records that I didn't review, forever.